What if I told you that England's most celebrated warrior prince, loved by his people, feared by the French and destined to be king, never sat on the throne? This is the story of Edward of Woodstock, better known as the Black Prince. At just 16 years old, he commanded armies, crushed the French at Crécy, and later captured their king at Poitiers. To the English, he was the very model of chivalry, an idol of courage and honor. To the French, he was a nightmare in black armor, a ruthless destroyer whose name became a curse. But here's the twist. Despite all his victories, Edward never became king. His life burned bright on the battlefield, only to be cut short by illness before he could inherit the crown. In this video, we'll uncover the remarkable rise of the Black Prince, his legendary battles, the origins of his mysterious name, and the tragic end of a warrior who shaped the 100 Years' War. Stay with us until the end, because the Black Prince's story is as much about power and glory as it is about loss and unanswered questions. Would you like me to move straight into Part 1, Early Life of Edward of Woodstock, so the script begins flowing as a continuous narrative? 1.5 Early Life of Edward of Woodstock. 1.5 Edward of Woodstock was born on June 15, 1330, at Woodstock Palace in Oxfordshire. He was the eldest son of King Edward III of England and Queen Philippa of Hainaut, and from birth his destiny was to inherit the English throne. The 14th century was a turbulent time. England and France were already entangled in the early stages of what would become the 100 Years' War, a conflict that would stretch across generations. From his earliest days, young Edward was raised not in luxury alone, but in the traditions of chivalry, knighthood, and warfare. His father, Edward III, believed deeply in the ideals of knighthood and made sure his heir embodied them. At just 7 years old, Edward was already appointed Prince of Wales, the traditional title of England's heir apparent. This gave him enormous prestige, but also the weight of expectation. He was trained by the greatest knights of his father's court, masters of sword, lance, and strategy. He learned not only how to fight, but also how to lead. Historians note that Edward showed signs of unusual discipline and courage even as a boy. He absorbed the principles of loyalty, honor, and duty, and he grew up in a court that glorified the Arthurian ideals of knighthood. His upbringing was meant to forge him into more than just a king. It was to make him a warrior prince, the very embodiment of England's ambitions in France. By the time he reached his teenage years, Edward of Woodstock was no ordinary royal child. He was already being prepared for command on the battlefield. That preparation would soon be tested, in one of the most famous clashes of the 100 Years' War. 1.5 The Battle of Crécy, a 16-year-old commander. 1.5 In 1346, when Edward was just 16 years old, he received his first real test of leadership. His father, King Edward III, had launched a major campaign into France, and the young prince was entrusted with commanding a division of the English army. The confrontation came at the Battle of Crécy, one of the most decisive battles of the 100 Years' War. The French outnumbered the English, boasting heavily armed knights and crossbowmen supported by Genoese mercenaries. By all expectations, the English should have been crushed. But Edward of Woodstock showed not only bravery, but also remarkable discipline under fire. Stationed on the English right flank, the prince and his men faced the brunt of repeated French cavalry charges. According to chroniclers, the young prince fought as if he were a man hardened by long years of war. At one point, the French assault was so fierce that messengers urged Edward III to send reinforcements to protect his son. But the king famously refused, declaring, "Let the boy earn his spurs." Those words became legendary. Edward did indeed earn his spurs that day. He held his ground, repelled the enemy, and emerged from Crécy as a hero of England. The battle was a catastrophic defeat for France, establishing English longbowmen as a force to be reckoned with, and cementing Edward's reputation as a rising star in military leadership. Crécy was not just a victory, it was the beginning of Edward's myth. He was no longer just the Prince of Wales. He had become the warrior prince, one who commanded respect from his soldiers and struck fear into his enemies. But Crécy was only the beginning. The young prince's legend would grow even greater in the years to come, especially at the Battle of Poitiers, where he would confront not just an army, but a king. Wifi, the Black Prince at Poitiers, capturing the French king, Wifi, by 1356, Edward of Woodstock was no longer the inexperienced teenager of Crécy. Now, in his mid-20s, he was a seasoned commander leading a campaign of raids across southern France. His forces, though smaller than the French army, were hardened, mobile, and disciplined. The French king, John II, sought to crush Edward once and for all. At Poitiers, the two armies finally clashed. The French vastly outnumbered the English, but Edward had learned well from Crécy. Positioning, patience, and the devastating power of the English longbow. The battle raged with intensity. Edward commanded from the front, inspiring his troops with both courage and cunning. As the French knights charged, they were met with relentless volleys of arrows, breaking their formations and sowing chaos. Edward's men then launched a counterattack at precisely the right moment. The turning point came when King John II of France himself was surrounded and captured. Chroniclers describe the Black Prince showing remarkable courtesy to the defeated king, even serving him food at his own table after the battle. It was the ultimate display of medieval chivalry, victory in arms combined with generosity to a fallen foe. The capture of the French king sent shockwaves across Europe. It was a humiliation for France and a triumph for England. Edward of Woodstock's reputation now reached legendary status. To the English people, he was a hero, an icon of courage and the very embodiment of the knightly ideal. But to the French, he was something far darker. His black armor, his relentless raids, and the devastation he left in his wake earned him a reputation as a terror of France. It is perhaps here, after Poitiers, that the seeds of his nickname, the Black Prince, began to take root. Yet, even as his fame soared, Edward's campaigns grew more ruthless. His strategy of chevauchée, burning towns and pillaging the countryside, brought England wealth, but also earned him hatred. The contrast between noble chivalry and brutal war would define his legacy. Wifi, the origins of the name, Black Prince, myth, legend, or reality. 1.5. One of the most fascinating mysteries surrounding Edward of Woodstock is the question of his nickname, the Black Prince. Strikingly, no contemporary chronicler of his time ever referred to him by that name. The title only began to appear nearly 200 years after his death, during the early 16th century. So, why black? Historians have debated the origin for centuries, and three leading theories emerge. 1. The black armor theory. Edward was known for wearing distinctive, dark-colored armor. In the medieval imagination, this imposing appearance on the battlefield might have inspired the nickname. Some depictions even show him clad in jet black plate, standing like a shadow of doom against his enemies. 2. The dark reputation theory. To the French, Edward was no chivalric hero. His campaigns across Aquitaine and his devastating chevauchée left villages burned, civilians displaced, and entire regions scarred. For those who suffered under his sword, black might have symbolized destruction, cruelty, and terror. 3. The romanticized legend theory. In the Tudor period, centuries later, writers and historians looked back at Edward as the model knight, brave, noble, larger than life. The name Black Prince may have been a poetic invention designed to add mystique, drama, and contrast to his story. A knight both glorious and fearsome. The truth may never be known. What is clear, however, is that the name stuck. Over time, the Black Prince became one of the most iconic figures in English history. A hero to some, a villain to others, and a legend to all. And yet, behind the legend, Edward of Woodstock was still human, a prince bound by duty, family, and eventually frailty. His later years would reveal a man worn down by both war and illness. 1.5. Later years. Illness, decline, and legacy. Martyr 1:5. For much of his life, Edward of Woodstock seemed invincible. He was the undefeated warrior prince, the champion of Crécy and Poitiers, the idol of the English people. But by the late 1360s, the Black Prince began to face an enemy no sword could defeat: his own failing health. Historians still debate what illness afflicted him. Some suggest dysentery, contracted during his long campaigns in Spain. Others believe it may have been a degenerative disease, slowly robbing him of his strength. Whatever the cause, by the early 1370s Edward was visibly weakened, often unable to ride at the head of his troops. Despite his illness, Edward remained devoted to his duties. He returned to England in 1371, leaving Aquitaine, and sought to guide the kingdom alongside his father, King Edward III. But the prince's once brilliant energy was gone. His political influence waned, and rival factions within the royal court began to grow in power. By 1376, at the age of just 45, Edward's condition had deteriorated beyond recovery. On June 8th of that year, the great warrior prince passed away in the Palace of Westminster, a year before his father. England mourned deeply. The heir to the throne, the nation's shining hope, was gone. His body was laid to rest in Canterbury Cathedral, beneath a magnificent tomb adorned with his effigy and once decorated black armor. To this day, visitors can still see his achievements carved into stone. The arms of France and England, his crest, and the lasting memory of his chivalric reputation. Edward's young son, Richard, would succeed as King Richard II, but he lacked his father's commanding presence. Many wondered how different England's fate might have been if the Black Prince had lived long enough to rule as king. Though Edward of Woodstock never wore the crown, his legacy as both the idol of the English and the terror of the French ensured his place among the immortals of history. His legend, half hero, half shadow, remains one of the most enduring tales of the 100 Years' War. The 1. Edward of Woodstock, the Black Prince, lived a life that reads like a legend. A boy who became a commander at 16, a prince who struck fear into France, a warrior celebrated for both his chivalry and his brutality. His victories at Crécy and Poitiers reshaped the balance of power in Europe, and his reputation as a fearless leader still echoes through the centuries. Yet, his story also reminds us of the fragility of life. Even the strongest warrior, the idol of his people, could not escape illness and death. Edward's passing before his fathers left England without its most brilliant heir, altering the course of history forever. The Black Prince never became king, but perhaps he didn't need to. His name alone carries the weight of a monarch, remembered not just as a royal figure but as a symbol of courage, ambition, and the eternal struggle for glory. Before we end, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think England would have been different if Edward had lived to be crowned king? Was he truly the model of chivalry, or a ruthless warlord feared for his cruelty? Share your ideas in the comments below. Let's keep this history alive through discussion. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the legend of the Black Prince, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss future episodes exploring the mysteries and legends of the past. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep seeking the hidden stories of history.